Can you repeat this? The
What?
acoustics.
These are the journalisms by way of critical aggregation, illuminated from the analytical research of a historiographer, neither from the Oriental nor the Occidental. Your engagement through a like, a share, and a subscribe will propel us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before.
Engage impulse engines. Engage. Engage.
Engage.
Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage.
Engage.
Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage. Engage.
Captain.
Engage emergency override.
Engage. Engage. Engage.
Engage forward shields, 35%.
Engage.
Engage the cloaking device.
Engage.
Of them. Engage them in conversation.
Engage. Engage.
Yemen sues U.S. arms dealers. Watch this space. U.S. arms dealers sued for aiding and abetting war crimes in Yemen. This is the cradle. The lawsuit says Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and General Dynamics, as well as several U.S. and Saudi officials, hold responsibility for extrajudicial killings in Yemen. U.S. defense contractors Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and General Dynamics have been sued by a group of 7 Yemeni nationals for aiding and abetting war crimes and extrajudicial killings by selling weapons to Gulf nations waging war in Yemen. Saudi and Emirati leaders Mohammed bin Salman and Mohammed bin Zayed are also named in the lawsuit, as well as U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. Year after year, the bombs fell on weddings, funerals, fishing boats, school buses, killing thousands of civilians and helping turn Yemen into the world's worst humanitarian crisis, reads the lawsuit according to Middle East Eye. Weapons supplied by U.S. companies through sales unlawfully approved by U.S. officials allowed Saudi Arabia and the UAE through the named defendant officials to pursue an indiscriminate and brutal bombing campaign. The lawsuit was filed on behalf of the victims of 2 separate bombings in Yemen by the Saudi-led coalition, one for a wedding in 2015 and another for a funeral in 2016. According to Human Rights Watch, in October 2015, the al-Sanabani family was readying to celebrate a relative's wedding when a coalition jet bombed the area, killing 43 Yemenis, including 13 women and 16 children. A year later, coalition jets dropped a U.S.-manufactured GBU-12 Pave Whale 2 laser guide bomb on a crowded funeral, killing over 100. The lawsuit was filed by Terrence Collingsworth of International Rights Advocates after the campaign against arms trades in the District Court of Washington, D.C., under the Torture Victim Protection Act, a 1991 law that allows victims of torture to sue for compensation from their tormentors if the accused are in the U.S. The lawsuit alleges that Western manufactured bombs have killed over 25,000 civilians since the beginning of the NATO-backed war nearly 8 years ago. In December, the UN revealed that at least 11,000 children had been killed or maimed during the war. The true toll of this conflict is likely to be far higher, indicated the children's agency UNICEF about the casualties in the world's worst humanitarian crisis. And from Tasnim News Agency, Yemeni nationals sue major U.S. arms manufacturers for war crimes in crisis-ridden nation. Tehran, a group of Yemenis filed a lawsuit in the U.S. District Court against American arms manufacturers Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and General Dynamics, accusing them of aiding and abetting war crimes and extrajudicial killings by supplying weapons to the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen. The suit by the group of 7 Yemeni individuals also names the leaders of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, as well as U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Pentagon Chief Lloyd Austin. The plaintiffs claim that weapons supplied by U.S. companies have allowed indiscriminate and brutal bombings, leading to the death of thousands of civilians and worsening Yemen's humanitarian crisis. The lawsuit is being filed under the Torture Victim Protection Act, a 1991 U.S. law, that allows victims of tortures to sue for compensation from their tormentors if the accused are in the U.S. The Saudi and Emirati crown princes are also named in the suit under the Alien Tort Statute, a law that grants federal courts jurisdiction over violations of international law. The plaintiffs represent victims of 2 bombings in Yemen, a wedding in 2015 and a funeral in 2016, in which over 140 people were killed. The lawsuit was filed by Terence Collingsworth of International Rights Advocates and comes after the Campaign Against Arms Trade announced its intention to take legal action against the British government over its arms sales to Saudi Arabia and Yemen. Meanwhile, the Yemen Executive Mine Action Center reported that 12 civilians were killed and 34 others injured in February due to explosive remnants of the Saudi-led aggression. The number of Yemenis who've fallen victim to cluster bombs since the beginning of the war now stands at over 25,000 civilians. Yemen has been in a state of crisis since Saudi Arabia, with support from the U.S. and other Western states, launched a devastating war on the country in March 2015, causing hundreds of thousands of deaths and exacerbating the world's worst humanitarian crisis. And from Press TV, Yemenis sue top U.S. arms producers for aiding war crimes in conflict-plagued nation. A group of Yemeni nationals has filed a lawsuit in the United States against major American arms manufacturers Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and General Dynamics, lambasting them for aiding and abetting war crimes and extrajudicial killings by supplying arms to the Saudi-led coalition's war in Yemen. The lawsuit filed in the District Court of Washington, D.C. also names the leaders of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, Mohammed bin Salman and Mohammed bin Zayed, respectively, as well as U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Pentagon Chief Lloyd Austin. Year after year, the bombs fell on wedding tents, funeral halls, fishing boats, school bus, etc., killing thousands of civilians and helping turn Yemen into the world's worst humanitarian crisis. The plaintiffs are 7 Yemeni individuals who said they represent the victims of the 2 separate Saudi-led bombings. And 1 year later, after the 2015 bombing in 2016, a crowd funeral was bombed and more than 100 people were killed. International human rights organizations reported at the time that the bomb that was used was manufactured by the U.S. I found him under a burning car. He was dead. His legs were cut off. His right hand was cut off too. He was completely burned. Khalid al-Salam Shaib, one of the plaintiffs said in a statement detailing the death of his son from the wedding bomb in 2015. Some nights when I sleep, I feel tight in my body and I have disturbing nightmares, and I can't bear to see the scene of the crime since, he said. The Yemeni plaintiffs are filing the lawsuit under the Torture Victim Protection Act, and the lawsuit names the Saudi and Emirati crown princes under the Alien Tort Statute, a law that grants federal courts jurisdiction over violations of international law. Meanwhile, the Yemen Executive Mine Action Center said in a statement that 12 civilians were killed and 34 others injured throughout the last month as a result of explosive remnants of the Saudi-led aggression. Many areas in Yemeni provinces have been bombarded by the Saudi-led military coalition with cluster bombs, while many of those intentionally or internationally banned munitions are still scattered among farms and roads, and their victims are in dozens, Yemak noted. The center further noted that the number of Yemenis who've fallen victim to cluster bombs since the beginning of the Saudi war on Yemen now stands at over 25,000 civilians. It stressed that landmines and other remnants of the war pose a serious threat to the residents of many districts and areas in Yemen. Saudi Arabia, in collaboration with its Arab allies and with arms and logistics support from the U.S. and other Western states, launched a devastating war on Yemen in March 2015. The objective was to crush the popular Ansar Allah resistance movement, which has been running state affairs in the absence of a functional government in Yemen, and reinstall the Riyadh-friendly regime of Abd Rabbu Mansour Hadi. The Saudi-led coalition has failed to achieve any of its objectives. Hundreds of thousands of Yemenis have been killed. Yemen is witnessing the world's worst humanitarian crisis now. So this Ansar Allah resistance movement has been elected as the official elected government. I mean, you can't, just because they are not in alignment with Western and U.S. policies doesn't mean that they're not a functional government. They are a functional government. It's kind of an insult. Yemenis sue U.S. arms manufacturers for aiding in war crimes. A group of Yemeni nationals filed a lawsuit in the U.S. against top arms producers Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and General Dynamics for aiding and abetting war crimes by supplying arms to a Saudi-led attack on Yemen. And from Middle East Eye, Yemenis sue top U.S. defense contractors for aiding war crimes. Lawsuit accuses Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and General Dynamics of aiding extrajudicial killings by supplying weapons to Saudi-led coalition in Yemen. A group of Yemeni nationals has filed a lawsuit in the U.S. against defense contractors Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and General Dynamics, accusing them of aiding and abetting war crimes and extrajudicial killings by supplying arms to the Saudi-led coalition's war in Yemen. The lawsuit filed in the District Court of Washington, D.C., also names the leaders of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, Mohammed bin Salman and Mohammed bin Zayed, respectively, as well as Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Pentagon Chief Lloyd Austin. Middle East Eye reached out to the Pentagon, the State Department, the embassies of Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and the three defense contractors for comments on the lawsuit. The State Department, Pentagon, and Lockheed Martin told MEE that they do not comment on pending litigation. Year after year, the bombs fell on wedding tents, funeral halls, fishing boats, school bus, and weapons supplied through sales unlawfully approved by U.S. officials allowed Saudi Arabia and the UAE through the named defendant officials to pursue an indiscriminate and brutal bombing campaign. March marks the 8th year of the Saudi-led intervention in Yemen, and rights advocates in the U.S. have been pushing for a definitive end to American support for the Saudi-led coalition. Earlier this week, more than 70 groups came together to protest U.S. support for the war in several states across the country. Yemen descended into the civil war in 2014 when Houthi rebels seized the country's capital and forced the internationally recognized government to flee to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, alongside a coalition of regional allies, namely the UAE, intervened in March 2015 to push the Houthis back. The coalition launched a wide-ranging aerial bombing campaign, carrying out thousands of airstrikes in an effort to roll back Houthi gains. Coalition forces also imposed an economic blockade on Houthi-controlled areas, including a sea and air blockade, worsening economic conditions for millions of Yemenis. A ceasefire brokered by the UN took effect in April 2022 and was extended, but eventually collapsed in October. Despite the absence of a truce extension, major fighting has not escalated in the months since it expired. So the Western coalition lost to the Houthis. That's essentially what they're saying. Watch this space. Remember your engagement by way of a like, a share and or a subscribe will accelerate us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before. Iran and the IAEA to resume nuclear cooperation. Iran and the UN nuclear watchdog reach an agreement, putting a cooperation between them back in the full throttle in the wake of a state visit by the agency's chief. Iran expressed readiness to provide further information and access to address the outstanding safeguard issues referring to uranium traces at the undeclared sites, said a joint statement by the International Atomic Energy Agency and Iran in support by Reuters, the agency reported Saturday. Tehran, according to the joint statement, will allow the UN nuclear watchdog to implement further verification and monitoring activities, and the modalities regarding the issue would be agreed upon in the course of a technical meeting that the joint statement said would take place in the Iranian capital soon. Furthermore, the IAEA issued a report regarding Iran's nuclear activity after the joint statement between the Islamic Republic and the UN agency, saying the watchdog's chief looked forward to the follow-up technical discussions and prompt and full implementation on the joint statement. Furthermore, Grossi said he welcomed Iran allowing the agency to implement further verification and monitoring activities, adding that he believed that his agency could start implementing concrete measures very soon, and that some monitoring equipment will begin operating again. He underlined that one key thing that came out of the agreement, which he said was a tangible result of the trip to Tehran, is that we've agreed that we're going to be moving on to concrete access to things, including people of interest. Grossi's 2-day visit came as the Vienna-based organization seeks greater cooperation with Iran on its nuclear activities. By having a constructive discussion and having good agreements like I'm sure we're going to have, we're going to be paving the way for important agreements, Grossi told a news conference alongside Iran's top nuclear official Mohammad Eslami after talks with the official. I believe that a marked improvement in terms of my dialogue with the Iranian government has been registered, the IAEA chief added in the joint statement. We've put a tourniquet on the bleeding of information and lack of continuity of knowledge we had. He also explained that the IAEA and Tehran agreed that the issue of knowledge continuity was going to be addressed, saying there would be 50% more inspections at the Fordow plant. In very few days, we'll have a team in Iran, Grossi added. Monitoring equipment will be reinstalled in a number of places. Grossi arrived in Iran on Friday amid a stalemate in talks to resurrect a landmark 2015 agreement on Iran's nuclear activities, known formally as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA. A diplomatic source told AFP the IAEA chief would meet President Ebrahim Raisi during his trip to launch the dialogue on Iran's atomic work and to reset the relationship at the highest level. Grossi has made it clear that he would only travel to Tehran if he was invited to meet with the president, according to the source. According to an IAEA report seen by AFP this week, uranium particles enriched up to 83.7%, just under the 90% required to produce an atomic bomb, had been detected at Iran's underground Fordow plant about 100 kilometers south of the capital. However, Tehran denies wanting nuclear weapons and that it's made no attempts to enrich uranium beyond 60% purity. Iran's government noted that unintended fluctuations may have occurred during the enrichment process. The discovery came after Iran made significant changes to an interconnection between two centrifuge clusters enriching uranium without informing the IAEA. Islami called on other signatories to the 2015 agreement to fulfill their obligations at a joint press conference on Saturday. 3 European and some other countries are just focusing on Iran's JCPOA obligations, he told the news conference. They too have obligations that they need to adhere to. We come to an arrangement with Grossi to define our cooperation within the framework of the safeguards on nuclear activity. During his visit, the IAEA Director General sought more access to the Fordo site, more inspections, according to a diplomatic source, and it seems that he got what he wished for by the end of the visit. Iran's Raisi says UN nuclear agency must not be influenced by U.S. and Israel. This is AA.com. Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi said Tehran expects that UN nuclear agency to carry out its mandate without coming under the political influence of powers that be. Raisi made the remarks in a meeting with the International Atomic Energy Agency chief Rafael Grossi, who is on a 2-day visit to Tehran. Raisi, as cited by Iran state media, told Grossi that Tehran expects the UN nuclear body to be wholly professional and not allow political powers to influence its activities. Iran's president singled out the U.S. and Israel as countries that have used nuclear issue as an excuse to put pressure on the Iranian nation, while indicting Israel for not signing the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. For his part, Grossi was quoted as saying that ill wishers are not in favor of bilateral cooperation between the IAEA and Iran without elaborating. In a Twitter post after the meeting, Iranian President's Deputy Chief of Staff Mohammad Jamshid said Grossi expressed satisfaction with the common agenda reached to pave the way for cooperation. President Raisi called cooperation of a two-way street that continues based on the agency's independence and fulfillment of the rights of the Iranian nation, he wrote. On day 2 of his visit, Grossi also held talks with Iran's Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdollahian, the minister said, with both reviewing cooperation. Iran's top diplomat, the ministry said, emphasized the serious will of the Islamic Republic of Iran to solve the technical issues between Tehran and IAEA. Grossi stated the importance of diplomacy and dialogue to solve issues and welcomed any constructive initiative to help the progress and conclusion of the Vienna negotiations. Resolution of the issues earlier in the day at a joint press conference with Iran's nuclear agency chief Mohammad Islami Grossi said, Iran and the UN nuclear watchdog are cooperating and moving forward to resolve outstanding issues related to the country's nuclear program. Emphasizing transparency, Grossi said, the two sides must work together closely on guarantees and assurances regarding Iran's nuclear program. His visit came amid a stalemate in talks aimed at the revival of the 2015 nuclear deal, known officially as the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, with cooperation between Iran and the IAEA emerging as one of the key sticking points. Recent reports about Iran ramping up uranium enrichment up to 84% purity based on a leak report by an IAEA inspector have also fueled tension between the two sides and sparked international concerns. Iran dismissed findings in the IAEA leaked report as a mistake and said the IAEA inspector in follow-up visit rectified it. The UN nuclear watchdog probe into what it claims are traces of uranium found that the 3 undeclared nuclear sites in Iran has also been a bone of contention between Iran and the West, complicating efforts to revive the nuclear deal that the U.S. abandoned in 2018. Grossi told reporters on Saturday that the two sides are working hard to resolve the issue related to the undeclared sites, adding that the leak of the IAEA reports make him angry and disappointed. IAEA not a political tool. As to comment on sabotage attacks on Iran's nuclear facilities, which Iran has mostly blamed on Israel, the UN nuclear agency chief said any military action on nuclear power plants is condemnable and illegal. He also deflected criticism about the UN agency's non-political approach, as alleged by Iran, stressing that it's important and necessary for Tehran and the IAEA to communicate more directly. The agency has never been used as a political tool. We have board of governors and we don't take orders from anyone, Grossi hastened to add, obliquely referring to the U.S. and Israel. On why the agency does not monitor nuclear sites in Israel, the IAEA chief said inspections are based on agreements under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which Iran has signed, but the Zionist occupation government has not, insisting that all countries should sign the treaty. Islami, for his part, said Grossi's visit, the first since March last year, is a message to boost communications and ties between the agency and Iran, adding that some countries seek to disrupt their cooperation. On the possibility of an anti-Iran resolution at the IAEA's upcoming quarterly Board of Governors meeting, Iran's nuclear agency chief said a decision on countermeasures will be taken if it takes place, adding the cooperation between them will continue. He also accused other signatories to the 2015 nuclear deal, namely the U.S. and European trio of the UK, France, and Germany, of not fulfilling the commitments under the agreement, which, he said, prompted Tehran to scale back its commitments and ramp up enrichment. The nuclear deal talks underway in Vienna since April 2021 are stalled since last August over issues related to Iran's cooperation with the IAEA, reports about Iran's drone supply to Russia, and recent month-long protests in Iran. Western countries have imposed a slew of sanctions on Iranian officials and entities in recent months, mostly related to protests in the country and drone shipments to Russia. And from EnglishNews.cn, Iranian president urges IAEA to adopt professional approach to Iranian nuclear deal. Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi said on Saturday he hopes the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, can adopt a professional approach to the Iranian nuclear issue and prevent certain countries from affecting nuclear watchdogs' decisions. Raisi made the remarks in a meeting with Visiting Director General of the IAEA, Rafael Grossi, in the capital of Tehran, according to a report on the president's website. Countries like Israel and the United States use the nuclear issue as an excuse to further pressure the Iranian people, said the president, pointing out that it was the United States that violated the 2015 nuclear deal between Iran and world powers. Iran has had the highest level of cooperation with the IAEA, expects the agency to tell the truth about Iran's nuclear program as well as the country's commitments of its regulations, he noted. Meanwhile, the IAEA chief expressed pleasure at visiting Iran and meeting the country's president, saying the IAEA's team, led by himself, had constructive and positive meetings with the Iranian side, according to the report. Grossi arrived in Tehran on Friday for a 2-day visit, during which he also held talks with Mohammad Eslami, president of the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran, and Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdullahian. In recent months, the IAEA has criticized Iran for its lack of cooperation with the agency. In November 2020, the IAEA's Board of Governors passed a resolution proposed by the U.S., Great Britain, France, Germany, and it called on Iran to collaborate with the agency's investigators regarding the alleged traces of uranium at a number of its undeclared sites. Iran has repeatedly rejected such allegations and emphasized the peaceful nature of its nuclear program. Yeah, I think what we get from that gaggle of stories is this idea that they just switched from one centrifuge to the other, and that triggered the higher enrichment rate. Very interesting. And finally, from Press TV, their coverage on the Iran nuclear deal.
It was reported as a positive trip by the IAEA chief Rafael Grossi to Iran's capital, Tehran. Grossi hailed relations between Iran and the IAEA as positive after meeting with Iran's atomic chief Eslami and Iran's president Ebrahim Raisi. But underlying this trip, IAEA inspectors had reported Iran had enriched uranium close to 84%, which Iran had to then clarify. Why are there such reports which then require Iran to have to defend its stance? And why did Grossi, when asked whether the IAEA is a political tool at the hands of a few, would deny this to be the case? Just a couple of the angles we'll be looking at in this edition of the Spotlight. First, let me introduce our guest. Farshid Bagharian is a political analyst who joins us from Karaj. Also joining us is Don DeBar, who's an activist and commentator, joining us from Ossining in New York. Gentlemen, welcome. Farshid Bagharian, first over to you. We're looking at what was this trip that took 2 days in duration, of which it was, I don't want to use the word hailed, but it was widely reported to be very positive in terms of the cooperation, and some even called an agreement between the IAEA and Iran. But why should this be such a positive thing when you take a look at all the different hardships that Iran has endured based on giving itself that cooperation spirit and then not getting what it should have gotten in return?
Thank you very much, and have a good night. I believe that the International Atomic Agency took the Iranian cooperation as a granted, because Iran, during this talk and deal with Iran for the nuclear talks from 2015 till now, during this time, always Iranian did their duty. But the Western Europe, the Western powers, especially the United States, they didn't act as a friendly act to us. So I just see in some days before, Mr. Putin announced that he withdrew from the START 1 nuclear agreement with the United States. This is what the main reason of the trip of Mr. Grossi to Tehran, because the escalation of the nuclear hazard or nuclear war all around the world, it makes them to think about again for Iran, because the particle they found as 84% of enrichment is what merely was the particle, not the activity. And right now the report should be friendly, as they had a common briefing, press briefing, I think, and they told that the enrichment was 60%, and this is acceptable for us. It was acceptable before this trip, and right now they need some guarantee from Iran for not enrich anymore, or maybe help Russia, because Russia is merging for a new attack on the spring to the Ukraine, and the escalation of the a nuclear hazard, maybe they spread all around the world. This is the fact that they are approaching more friendly to Iran this time. This is the fact, not anything else, because Mr. Ned Price and Mr. Blinken speeches regarding, and their opinion was not friendly, and they told that we are waiting for the report from the Mr. Gerussi, and Mr. Gerussi is not the decision maker for the West, and just not bringing any he's not bringing any message from West to us. Just Mr. Gerussi is take them that Iran did his duty, and Iran is giving the guarantee to not support any nuclear, nuclear, how can I explain, nuclear hazard for the spread over the world. That is the fact that
Okay.
Mr. Gerussi was here. Yeah.
All right.
Thank
Well,
you.
Don DeBar, I guess there talked about 60% enrichment. I have so many questions to ask, but just on that particular note there was a press conference that Grossi had in Vienna just about an hour ago. And this is really interesting. He says on the 60%, the Iranians, don't need to tell us why they reached 60%. What's important, we have the necessary ability to inspect. Isn't that kind of an odd statement to come from the IAEA chief, Rafael Grossi?
It is an odd statement if you expect essentially that these, that the architecture of international relations is, an architecture of honest brokerage. But of course it's not. It's in the real world. The United States and the Soviet Union were the principal engines of the IAEA. Eisenhower is credited with, it being his brainchild in 1957, but the United States didn't ratify the treaty and put it into effect as against the U.S. until 1967. The organization is centered in Vienna. That's in the heart of NATO, basically. And it has been, like the other instruments of international architecture based in Western Europe, an instrument of colonial control of much of the rest of the world. Look at the International Court of Justice and the other, the Hague judicial structures in general, which for some reason seem to prefer to indict African leaders over any other, potential defendants. The objective picture, going on right now is the United States is attempting to isolate each of its enemies between Russia, China, Iran in particular, and also South Africa and others that are beginning to see perhaps the objective requirement of some sort of military cooperation in the face of, an assault from the U.S. and NATO against all of them at once. There are the claims that Iran is sending drones and setting up manufacturing facilities for drones in Russia. There's the claim that China is considering manufacturing weapons for Russia, threats from the United States and all of that. This is the context in which Grossi holds his press conference. Remarkable, actually, is the fact that he didn't claim to find a nuclear suitcase when he was in Tehran and seek to have the U.S. invade and get rid of the weapons of mass destruction, because that is the pressure certainly coming from Washington at the moment.
Farshid Bagharian, taking a look at what question was asked by our Press TV correspondent to Rafael Grossi on the fact that whether the IAEA has been politicized in terms of the way information is given out, or that it's being used as a political tool, and in terms of just overall vis-a-vis Iran, how it's given out ambiguous statements. The response by Grossi was, I think any attack, any military attack on a nuclear facility is outlaw, is out of the normative structures that we will all abide by. And he wouldn't even acknowledge that Iran's nuclear facility was actually attacked by Israel on more than one occasion. I mean, this is Rafael Grossi of the past. I'm not too sure what type of transformation he's gone through from then since now when it comes to Israel. Of course, we need to also mention that he went to Israel before there was a resolution leveled against Iran through the Board of Governors in the past. Why is he playing that posturing when asked that question?
I believe that, first of all, thank to our friend. Fully agree with what he said. The fact is, Iran is right now, we have an expression in political science that means that sitting on the fence. Iran right now is sitting on the fence, and Iran can be declined to the right or the left. And that is the fact. Right now, it's terrifying the world. I mean, the nuclear talk is right now, they're terrifying the world. Because we can decline to the third, World War III. Maybe we can decline to the position that may push the war to the peace talk. This is the fact that right now, as you see, 1 or 2 days before, it was a news that in the media that Russia is trying to reach to the Persian Gulf or the Oman Sea, and they can consider that Russia is spreading its power to the whole region. Regarding the Israel, and holding this point right now, regarding the Israel has a very vulnerable size, and Israel is not powerful. Despite of Iron Dome, and Israel is not a safe place for the Israeli people. And any conflict with Iran through drones, through missiles, or any kind of the war machine, it would be very hazardous for the region, especially for the Israeli regime. So right now they are trying to push Iran down from the fence to the exact point or exact site that they want right now. And I want to repeat that Mr. Garussi is not the policymaker guy or the player. Just he sent his report, and remember that before the September, after the September 11th, then they attacked Iraq, and after that, because they found some facilities and some sites that they are producing chemical and biological and maybe a nuclear weapon, and after that they said that the FBI report was false. Mm-hmm. Right now, Iran is not giving them any permission to give the false report, and this is the fact that Mr. Garussi was here in Iran.
All right, Don DeBar, as this news is spreading, because it's very fresh off the press, especially given this press conference that Rafael Grossi had in Vienna, a very simple question that comes out of this is, why should Iran trust, I'm not going to say the agency, but the other actors, in particular the U.S., when it comes to anything that has to deal with Iran's civilian nuclear file? I mean, why should there be optimism here, which Grossi is sending this message of optimism? Put that into context for us, if you can.
Yeah, there's a number of ways to do that. Very first is there's supposedly, there is already an agreement that was negotiated over a period of years with an awful lot of pressure from the United States, an awful lot of determination from Iran to protect its sovereignty, a participation of many others. Agreement was signed, executed, implemented, except for the part where Iran was supposed to get sanctions relief. That never really happened. Trump gets elected. He was campaigning against the agreement, and he abrogated what little participation the U.S. had done up to that point. And Biden ran against that, saying that Trump, was making trouble where there was no need for trouble, and that he shouldn't have withdrawn from the agreement. And now we're 2 years into Biden's administration, and we still are here playing this game instead of starting, where we were at on January 20th, 2017. That's the aspect with respect to the U.S. In 2014 and 2015, the United States, some 50 years almost 50 years after the execution of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which calls for the sunsetting of all nuclear weapons within a reasonable period of time, announces, in fact, it's going to spend $1 trillion to renew its nuclear arsenal. And I know that Mr. Grossi was not the head of the IAEA at the time, but I don't see any statement right now demanding that the United States cease and desist from that. Finally, in the context of the war in Ukraine, the nuclear doctrine of Russia was spelled out very simply, which is, number one, we will only use nuclear weapons if we are attacked with nuclear weapons or if the very survival of our state is threatened. And the U.S. response to that was to announce that they intended to take down the Russian state. If I were the head of the IAEA, I would then condemn the United States, first of all, for making this statement, and then tell them you have to do everything to back out of this condition so you don't provoke a nuclear war. And I don't see any of that happening. I see them nickel and diming Iran, impugning its integrity and sovereignty, and frankly, shilling for Israel.
Okay, so since both have mentioned Ukraine in this context in terms of Iran, Farshid Bagharian, are we looking at the fact that instead of anybody pinning their hopes on something coming out of all the positive, from what it appears to be positive news coming from Grossi, that this is just so Grossi, through the IAEA, which is one of the UN's organization, which the U.S. provides at least almost a quarter of its budget, that they just want to have some kind of watch over Iran's civilian nuclear program, but they're not going to give any type of room for Iran because they believe that Iran, which Iran has denied, is providing Russia with these, for example, drones.
I believe that the watchdogs group, prior to the trip of Mr. Grossi, was in Iran, and they expected everything. And so he was, how can I explain? It was a political show only, merely, and nothing else. But the friendly and positively report has not make sense for Iran, first of all, because we are facing another decision making. For example, right now, the Congress and the Senate of the United States is not giving power to the Mr. Biden administration, Mr. Biden himself, for example, to sign any new agreement with Iran, and they have to pass it because the legitimacy of this, the agreement would be passed from the Congress, and they're very blockage and obstacle for Iran for any new agreement for Iran. But as I'm going to repeat again, the fact is, we are approaching a new world war, maybe hazard, because Mr. Gerasimov is right now the head of the operation of the new spring attack to Ukraine, and the Gerasimov doctrine itself contains the using of the nuclear power, and that is the fact that the world is right now is being terrified, and in this position they want to how can I explain? To make Iran silence, to not cooperate with Russia as a strategic, tie. Yeah.
Well, when you say this,
watch this space. Remember, your engagement by way of a like, share, and subscribe will propel us, accelerate us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before. Bakhmut nearly fully encircled by Russian forces, says reports. Russia's almost Russia almost has the entirety of Bakhmut in its grips as the Ukrainian forces are pushed back and Moscow shells the routes of the city. The last routes of Bakhmut were hit by Russia on Friday as Moscow seeks to complete its encirclement of the city that's been at the center of fierce battles for months now, putting Russia before a new major victory. The city, according to the head of Russian Wagner private military company Yevgeny Prigozhin, is almost completely surrounded with only one route still open for Kiev's forces. The UK Ministry of Defense stated earlier on Saturday that the routes to besiege Bakhmut made the possibility of resupplying the Ukrainian armed forces increasingly limited. The Ukrainian defense of the Donbas town of Bakhmut is under increasingly severe pressure with intense fighting taking place in and around the city. The MOD highlighted that within the last 36 hours, 2 key bridges in Bakhmut have been destroyed, including a vital bridge connecting the city to the last main supply route from Bakhmut to the city of Chasiv Yar. However, the Russian forces have also made additional gains and have advanced in the northern suburbs of the city, which is now a Ukrainian-held salient vulnerable to Russian attacks on 3 sides. Reuters news agency reported that there was heavy shelling from the Russian side aimed at blocking the Ukrainians from leaving and entering the city, thus preventing them from both withdrawing and receiving backup. Reportedly, ahead of the Russian shelling, Ukrainian soldiers were working on preparing the damaged roads, with troops heading toward the front line to bolster Kiev's position, as other troops were digging new trenches for defensive positions in the west. The Russian RIA Novosti news agency released footage showing Wagner fighters passing by a damaged facility, and one fighter heard saying Kiev's forces were destroying infrastructures and settlements near the city in order to prevent Russian encirclement. An advisor to the head of the Donetsk Republic, Igor Khmelkovsky, said in late February that soldiers for the Ukrainian armed forces blew up a dam near Bakhmut, also known as Artyomovsk, in a bid to slow down the Russian offensive and force civilians to leave the besieged city. The dam was blown up and the resulting torrent of water flowed toward Artyomovsk. They're likely trying to halt our offensive. Maybe they want to try and cut off our assault units from the rear to slow down munition supply, Khmelkovsky told Russian news agency Sputnik. According to the advisor, the move could also mean that Ukrainians were preparing to abandon the city to the Russian forces and were getting desperate. They told civilians to evacuate. Their goal is to make living conditions unbearable. They don't care about the people. They only care about destroying the city so that it'd be economically unfeasible for us to rebuild, Denis Pushilin's advisor added. Bakhmut's a slaughterhouse on both sides, said the commander of the Ukrainian army unit at Bakhmut, Denis Yaslovsky, during an interview with Espresso TV, adding that some units have been ordered to rotate to more secured positions. This comes after a U.S. mercenary fighting on the front lines against the Russian armed forces said the Bakhmut front lines were highly gruesome, comparing it to a meat grinder as Russia pushes against Kiev forces in the city for which battles have been taking place for months. Units of the private military company Wagner have practically surrounded Bakhmut, Prigozhin said. Only one route's left, the pincers are closing. The Wagner chief called on Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky during a video to order a retreat from Bakhmut, also known as Artyomovsk, in a bid to save his soldiers' lives. The video then showed 3 captured soldiers asking to be allowed to go back home. A U.S. mercenary fighting on the front lines against the Russian armed forces said late in February the Bakhmut front lines were highly gruesome, comparing the front line to that meat grinder. Former U.S. Marine Troy Offenbacher underlined to ABC News that the life expectancy of Ukrainian soldiers on the city's front lines was only about 4 hours, with a major offensive still expected from Russia. Offenbacher underlined that he was not sure how long Kiev's forces would be able to hold the city, adding that the expected offensive had already kicked off and that attacks from Russians have been non-stop in Bakhmut, with artillery raining down upon it all day and night. The commander of a Ukrainian drone unit in Bakhmut, Robert Brovdy, came out and said his unit had been ordered to withdraw immediately, saying he'd been fighting there for nearly 4 months. Documents obtained by Politico show that the EU's been supplying Ukraine with arms through an off-budget intergovernment cash pot called the European Peace Facility, which aims to repay countries that sent arms to Ukraine. It has so far paid Ukraine $3.6 billion in military aid, with member states deciding to increase its funding by $2 billion in 2023. The document suggests that $1 billion should be focused euros should be focused on ammunition, notably 15 millimeters, as soon as the €2 billion top-up of the European Peace Facility is operationalized, according to an EU official. This means that half of the year's top-up should be for ammunition, mainly shells. The document also anticipated the increase in European industrial production, which is straining to produce ammunition at the rate demanded by the war. And that's from Al Mayadeen. And from globalnews.ca, pressure from Russian forces mounted Saturday on Ukrainians hunkered down in Bakhmut as residents attempted to flee with help from troops who Western analysts say may be preparing to withdraw from the key eastern stronghold. A woman was killed and 2 men were badly wounded by shelling while trying to cross a makeshift bridge out on the city of Donetsk, according to Ukrainian troops who were assisting them. A Ukrainian army representative who asked not to be named for operational reasons told the Associated Press that it was now too dangerous for civilians to leave Bakhmut by vehicle and that people had to flee on foot instead. Bakhmut has for months been a prime target of Moscow's grinding eastern offensive in the war, with Russian troops, including forces from the Wagner Group, inching even closer. An AP team near Bakhmut on Saturday saw a pontoon bridge set up by Ukrainian soldiers to help the few remaining residents reach the nearby village of Kromov. Later, they saw at least 5 houses on fire as results of attacks in Kromov. Ukrainian units, over the past 36 hours, destroyed 2 key bridges just outside Bakhmut, including one linking it to the nearby town of Chasiv Yar, along the last remaining Ukrainian resupply route, according to UK military intelligence officials and other Western analysts. The UK Defense Ministry said in the latest of its regular Twitter updates that the destruction of the bridges came as Russian fighters made further inroads into Bakhmut's northern suburbs. The Institute for the Study of War, a Washington-based think tank, assessed late on Friday that Kiev's actions may point to a looming pullout from parts of the city. It said Ukrainian troops may conduct a limited and controlled withdrawal from particularly difficult sections of eastern Bakhmut, while seeking to inhibit Russian movement there and limit exit routes to the west. Capturing Bakhmut would not only give Russian fighters a rare battlefield gain after months of setbacks, but it might rupture Ukraine's supply lines and allow the Kremlin's forces to press toward other Ukrainian strongholds in the Donetsk region. Civilians spoke about daily struggles as the fighting raged on nearly nonstop, reducing much of Bakhmut to rubble. Husband and wife Hennady Mizapa and Natalia Ishkova, who chose to remain in the city, say they lack food and basic utilities. Humanitarian aid is given to us only once a month. There's no electricity, no water, Ishkova told AP on Saturday. I pray to Allah that all who remain here will survive, she said. At the United Nations on Friday, Deputy Spokesman Farhan Haq said UN humanitarian staff reported intensive hostilities near Bakhmut, and the few humanitarian partners on the ground were focusing on evacuating the most vulnerable. Also, Saturday, Russia's defense chief traveled to eastern Ukraine to inspect troops and award them with state decorations, the defense ministry said. Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu visited a command post where he was briefed by Regional Commander Rustam Muradov, according to a video published by the ministry. It didn't disclose the command post's selection. Elsewhere, Ukraine's emergency services reported in the morning that the death toll from a Russian missile strike that hit a 5-story apartment building in southern Ukraine on Thursday rose to 11. Emergency services said in an online statement that rescuers pulled 3 more bodies on the wreckage overnight, some 36 hours after a Russian missile tore through 4 floors of the building in the riverside city of Zaporozhye. A child among those reported killed, and rescue efforts ongoing. Russian shelling on Saturday also killed 2 residents of frontline communities in the surrounding Zaporozhye region, that the local military administration reported. A 57-year-old woman and a 68-year-old man also died in Nikopol, a town farther west near the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, as Russian forces fired artillery shells and rockets at Ukrainian-held territory across the Dnieper River. Regional government Seri Lysak reported. In the western city of Lviv, hundreds of kilometers from the front lines, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met Saturday with the head of the European Union Parliament. Hours earlier, Zelensky held talks with U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland and top European legal officials on how to hold Russia accountable for its actions in the Ukraine. In a joint press briefing with Zelensky, European Parliament President Robert Metsola said that all those responsible for suspected Russian war crimes in Ukraine, including Russian President Vladimir Putin, must be brought to justice before a durable peace is achieved. Metsola voiced support for the EU's announcement Thursday that an international center for the prosecution of the crime of aggression, that act of invading another country, would be set up in The Hague. She also called for Ukraine to start negotiations on joining the 27-nation bloc as early as this year, and urged Western nations to keep arming Kiev as it battles Russian forces in the east and south. The EU agreed in June to put Ukraine on the path toward membership, setting in motion process that could take years or even decades. However, Moscow's invasion and Ukraine's request for fast-track consideration have lent urgency to the negotiations. Ukraine's future is in the European Union. We will walk all the way with you, Metsola said on Twitter late Friday. Ukraine latest. Bakhmut residents flee as city takes on heavy fire. This is from AsiaNikkei.com. The war that began with Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 has reached a grim one-year milestone, with mounting military and civilian deaths. As Russia steps up attacks around Bakhmut, Western nations have raised their military support for Ukraine to the highest level yet, with commitments to send main battle tanks. Here are the latest developments. 1 a.m. Kiev's troops, civilians flee Bakhmut in a move some Western analysts see as preparations for a possible Ukrainian withdrawal from the eastern city under heavy assault from Russian forces. A woman's killed, 2 men are badly wounded by shelling while trying to cross a makeshift bridge out of Bakhmut, the Ukrainian military says. A Ukrainian army representative tells the Associated Press that it was now too dangerous for civilians to leave the city in Donetsk province by vehicle, and that people had to flee on foot yesterday. And Saturday, March 4th, North Korea, which has been a staunch supporter of Moscow since its launch of its invasion of Ukraine, calls for an international investigation into blasts that damaged Russia's undersea Nord Stream gas pipelines last year. Moscow says without providing evidence the West was behind the blast that damaged the pipelines in September, and has called for an international investigation. Western officials have denied those accusations. In a Northern Korean state news agency article, international affairs critic An Chol-hyuk calls for an impartial investigation, saying the world needs to be aware of the vicious coerciveness, war, and conspiracy maneuvers of the United States. Russian artillery pounds the latest routes of Bakhmut, aiming to completely encircle the besieged Ukrainian city and score Moscow's first major victory in a half a year in the bloodiest fighting of the war. The head of Russia's Wagner private army said the city blasted to ruins during a month. The more than 7-month onslaught was almost completely surrounded, with only one road still open for Ukraine's troops. Reuters observed intense Russian shelling of routes leading west out of Bakhmut, and apparent attempt to block Ukrainian forces' access in and out of the city. A bridge in the adjacent town of Kromo was damaged by Russian tank shelling. The U.S. announces a new military aid package for Ukraine at 3:12 a.m. yesterday, worth up to $400 million, that for the first time will include mobile bridges to move tanks and armored vehicles. The bridges, known as armored vehicle launch bridges, will accompany demolition munitions and equipment used for clearing obstacles, the U.S. Department of Defense says, in what analysts see as support for offensive operations. Assault bridging allows armored vehicles to cross narrow rivers and ditches that would otherwise cause a whole force to slow down, Jack Watling, a senior research fellow for land warfare at the London-based Royal United Services Institute, tells Reuters. Importantly, Assault bridges are only critical for offensive operations, showing that the U.S. is preparing Ukraine to continue retaking its territory. The new aid will provide much-needed 155 millimeter and other artillery rounds, which Ukraine has sought, as well as additional ammunition for highly mobile artillery rocket systems. And from Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, this is referral. Situation critical for Ukrainian defenders in Bakhmut as civilians reportedly flee on foot. Residents were reportedly fleeing on foot from the devastated eastern Ukrainian city of Bakhmut as Russian forces shelled the area and the last remaining escape routes, with Kiev saying the situation was critical for Ukrainian defenders even as they continue to repel multiple attacks in the region. Ukrainian troops told AP on March 4th that a woman was killed and 2 men were severely injured by Russian shelling as they were attempting to cross a makeshift bridge out of Bakhmut a day after the head of Russia's Wagner mercenary group said the city was nearly surrounded. AP quoted an unnamed Ukrainian army representative as saying it was now too dangerous for civilians to depart Bakhmut by vehicle because of Russian shelling, and the most were forced to flee on foot. Western military experts said the situation in Bakhmut remains critical and the Ukrainian defenders are coming under increasingly severe pressure in and around the city, which had a pre-war population of about 70,000. In the eastern region of Donetsk, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine said in its daily bulletin that the Ukrainian military had repelled more than 150 attacks by Russian troops over the past day in the areas of Bakhmut, Lyman, Avdiivka, and Shakhtarsk. The enemy is ceaselessly attempting to encircle Bakhmut, the General Staff said, adding that numerous attacks aimed at surrounding Bakhmut were repelled by Ukrainian fighters in the adjacent areas of Vasyukivka, Dubovo, and Vasilivka and Ivanivsk. Battlefield reports from either side could not immediately be verified. Ukrainian officials have suggested that their troops might have to pull out of Bakhmut entirely once the defense of the city becomes too costly and withdraw to new positions in the west and the northwest, where Ukrainians are reported to have far stronger defensive positions. Despite the situation described by a Ukrainian commander as critical, Kiev's defenders were reportedly digging in at defensive sites and were not ready to give up the town. All units involved in the defense of Bakhmut clearly perform their tasks. Our soldiers are constantly working in extremely harsh conditions and doing everything to ensure that the number of enemy's forces is reduced every day, General Viktor Korenko, the commander of the Special Operation Forces, wrote on Facebook. And from TurkiaNewspaper.com, according to the statement of the Russian Wagner mercenary forces, Bakhmut is practically besieged. Russia announced that Wagner mercenary forces have surrounded the Bakhmut region of Ukraine. The founder of the mercenary forces called on the Ukrainian President Zelensky to evacuate Bakhmut. Yevgeny Prigozhin, founder of Russia's Wagner mercenary force, said in a video published on Friday, March 3rd, that the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut was practically surrounded by his forces and that Kiev's forces had only one road left out. Prigozhin's men have spearheaded the assault in eastern Ukraine for months. Moscow regards Bakhmut, which it calls by its Soviet-era name of Artyomovsk, as a useful stepping stone to seize bigger cities like Kramatorsk and Slavyansk. Prigozhin, wearing a military uniform in the video, called on Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to withdraw his forces from the small city. Bakhmut was besieged. Units of the private military company Wagner have practically surrounded Bakhmut. Only one road is left open to Ukrainian forces. The pinchers are getting tighter, said Prigozhin. The location of the video was verified by buildings, walls, the railway lines, rivers, which match satellite imagery. It was shot approximately 7 kilometers north of the center of Bakhmut in the settlement of Paraskovivka. The date it was filmed could not be independently verified. Prigozhin announced the capture of Paraskovivka on February 17th. Prigozhin said his forces were increasingly fighting against old men and children rather than the professional Ukrainian army. Prigozhin on Thursday released another video showing his fighters inside Bakhmut. Reuters geolocated the footage to the east of Bakhmut, around 1.2 miles from the center of the city.
It is obvious to the most simple-minded that Lokai is of an inferior breed.
The obvious visual evidence, Commissioner, is that he is of the same breed as yourself.
Are you blind, Commander Spock? Oh, look at me.
I thought you scientists were supposed to keep an open mind.
There's a difference between keeping an open mind and believing something because you want it to be true.
Your friend Spock is a logical man.
I find your arguments strewn with gaping defects in logic.
Most illogical reaction. We demonstrated our superior weapons. They should have fled.
You mean they should have respected us?
Of course.
Mr. Spock, respect is a rational process. Did it ever occur to you they might react emotionally? With anger?
Doctor, I'm not responsible for their unpredictability.
You do not think like the others. There are no colors to your patterns of logic. There's only black and white.
Logical, unemotional, completely pragmatic. And we poor, irrational humans whip them in a fair fight. Now you'll find yourself back among us illogical humans again.
Which I find eminently satisfactory, Doctor. For nowhere am I so desperately needed.
Because she feels. I don't. All I know is logic.
Will you try to understand how we feel about our life here? About each other?
The whole notion of logic.
Emotions are alien to me. I'm a scientist.
You're gonna leave here without them? Run off on some wild goose chase halfway across the galaxy just because you found a discrepancy in a hydrogen cloud?
Doctor, I'm chasing the captain, Lieutenant Uhura, and Ensign Chekhov, not some wild aquatic fowl.
Mr. Spock, you have a remarkably logical and analytical mind.
Thank you. I prefer the concrete, the graspable, the provable.
You'd make a splendid computer, Mr. Spock.
And here's Sergei Lavrov on Ukraine and Nord Stream.
How has the war in Russia, how has this war affected Russia's energy interests? Energy. Is it pivoting towards Asia? And is it the deepening relationship about gas into India and all that she's asking about?
You know, the war which we are trying to stop and which was launched against us using the Ukrainian people,
yeah, this Indian, British indoctrinated, pseudo-Western crowd that supports the G20, is of the mind that the conflict began when Russia, so-called, invaded the Ukraine. But the reality is that was in 2022, and 2014 was when the United States government supported a coup that overthrew a democratically elected government in the Ukraine. So, as far as a lot of people are concerned, maybe not this crowd in general that supports, Anglophiles and the West, maybe they don't necessarily believe that or adhere to that concept, but that's the truth of the matter. So Sergei Lavrov is not incorrect there.
Of course, it influenced the policy of Russia, including energy policy, and the blunt way to describe what is the change, what changed, we would not anymore rely on any partners in the West. We would not allow them to blow the pipelines again. By the way, we asked for investigation, and immediately this investigation request was denied. The Americans called it a nonsense, and when Seymour Hersh published his findings, you saw what the reaction of Europeans and the Americans was. Germany was humiliated, and physically, and morally, and in any other way. Everything which is happening now is to reduce Europe to subordinate player for the United States, to undercut European competitive edge, and of course to ruin the economic link between Russia and European Union. This is very obvious. So be it. If this is the choice of them, which fits, by the way, in the rhetoric, in the narrative that what is going on is existential for the West from the point of view of its ability to dominate. And everything fits into place.
Thank you, Minister.
And the energy policy of Russia will be oriented towards reliable partners, credible partners. India and China are certainly among them.
Thank you so much, Minister.
Okay, I've opened the channel. Beam me up.
Beam me up, Mr. Spock. Beam me up. Lock on transporters. Beam us up. Beam us up. Quickly. Beam us up home. Beam us up.
Prepare to beam us up, Mr. Scott. Beam us up, Mr. Scott.
Prepare to beam us up. Mr. Scott, prepare to beam us up. Have Scotty beam us up. Beam us up. Beam us up. Scotty, beam us up fast. Stand by to beam us up. Scotty, beam me up.
Beam me up.
Beam us up now!
Stand by to beam us up.
No need to beam me up, sir. The situation is under control.